Ooh,
I'm looking for my Jordans.
That's right. They're here somewhere.
Thank you so much, Lynette. We at the MassMutual Foundation are big admirers of you all over at the Truist Foundation. And for those of you who may not know MassMutual and the MassMutual Foundation, we are a financial services organization with the purpose of helping people secure their future and protect the ones they love. We are a mutual company, so we are owned by our policyholders, which is significant because it deeply directs the strategy of the MassMutual Foundation. About 175 years ago in Western Massachusetts, a group of neighbors got together, pooled their money, and said, if anything happens to me, please take care of my family. And that's how MassMutual was born. This origin story has really shaped the focus of the foundation at this convergence of social and financial capital. Investing in social capital, building really meaningful relationships across communities so that people can get ahead in life and thrive. And financial capital, creating greater access to resources that generate wealth. We know that access to these critical types of capital are not distributed evenly across the country, nor that the MassMutual Foundation can meet the scale of the challenge alone. So today, we are going to engage in a conversation about fearless finance, about partnerships driving impact, but we're not just talking about capital. We're talking about the courage to engage in collaboration, pool our resources, the courage to expose our blind spots, the courage to share power. I know that one's hard. The immense challenges that we aim to address require us to seek solutions that have an amplifier effect, where the whole becomes so much greater than the sum of its parts. So Harold and Henry are two leaders doing just that, forging partnerships and challenging convention in ways that really drive measurable impact. So let's start with the big picture, gentlemen. Tell me about yourselves and the vision that you're working towards in this future. Henry, we'll start with you.
Good morning, and thank you. My name is Henry Hips. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Diffusion Venture Studio. I've launched the Venture Studio after several years being on the leadership team at the Gates Foundation, having been an edtech entrepreneur, having been on leadership teams at education institutions. And the specific purpose of Diffusion Venture Studio is to launch tech-enabled, research-backed new ventures that are focused on the future of learning and future of work.
Harold?
Absolutely. Good morning. Well, that's pretty loud. Good morning, everybody. Harold Pettigrew. I serve as the president and CEO for the Opportunity Finance Network. And we support over nearly 500 organizations across the country, community investment institutions, the original kind of impact investment OGs in many ways, but organizations that are on the ground making sure that capital works in communities. We also aggregate capital, and so we manage over $1 billion in total assets that we raise for those members and then deploy to them to support small business, housing, you name the community need, we finance it. Charter schools, childcare, all of those respective areas. And then last, we're advocates as well. So we make sure that there's supportive policies in place for community investment.
Wonderful. So the title here is Fearless Finance, and it suggests a boldness in capital aggregation and deployment. What does that look like in your work, and how do you balance that risk and responsibility? Harold?
Happy to. So we've been around for 40 years, and so there's a certain standard at which we apply that we invest in people, not profiles, not paper, right? And when you invest in people, you trust in people and have those deep relationships, there's actually not a fear to what we do, because regardless of the circumstances of a disruption or everyday needs of an entrepreneur or someone who's pursuing housing, we have deep relationships. And so much of our work is, because we're investing in people, it allows us to get more deeply into the ways that communities actually need capital to show up. That was our founding principle, making sure that capitalism worked differently and capital was deployed differently into communities. And so, there's this notion even of us coming into the conversation. What we do and what we have done for 40 years has been a level of fearlessness throughout our history, because we've made sure, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of the economic conditions, that communities have the capital that they need to survive.
Yeah.
And for us, I mean, there's a certain level of boldness that's required to even focus on the learning and workforce sectors at a time of great change, right? Industry is changing rapidly, the labor markets, post-secondary institutions, just thinking through the types of skills that individuals need to be successful is rapidly changing. So it's not an easy space to be in, but it's one where there is incredible opportunity to have both impact and generate returns. And so the way we think about risk, number one is with a portfolio approach to risk, right? So when we have a portfolio of concepts that we are working through and ultimately which will become new ventures, we have some in that portfolio that are the big bets. And we can take those big bets with much more confidence because we have other things in the portfolio that may be lower risk. Now, when you look at risk for one individual organization that we may launch, one single entrepreneur is undertaking a much greater risk for their one entity that they may launch than we would be if we were launching that same entity across a portfolio. The second thing we're doing is actually attracting world-class capital and world-class human capital that C-level chief technology officer, chief product officer, chief revenue officer, folks who are deeply experienced in the field that we can leverage slices of across that portfolio. And because we can leverage them in a very efficient way, we're able to bring that type of skill to early stage venture development in ways that single founders have great difficulty doing when they're that young.
Yeah. So partnerships, I hear, are central to both of your models. Can you share a specific example where a partnership presented an approach that maybe helped you see an opportunity or a blind spot that you would have otherwise missed? Henry?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that. So for us, one of the ways we think about aggregating capital is by blending capital, right? So we're looking at philanthropic sources, we're looking at for-profit investment capital, we're looking at government sources. One of our early funders was the Walton Family Foundation. Now, our initial conversations with them were about anchoring our investment round, right? So anchoring the private investment capital part of our model. They came back and said, hey, what we'd really prefer to do is do a grant. Now, that wasn't what we were after initially, but that ultimately ended up being a blessing because what that did was enable us to take a step back and better understand what our model should look like without the pressure of having to generate returns. Mm-hmm. And so it was even before we became a formal entity, and we were able to leverage that philanthropic capital to hone in on exactly what our model should look like. It also gave us the flexibility to the point that our first launch was actually a nonprofit, as opposed to having to be a for-profit, which is what is required when we're leveraging the for-profit part of our capital. So it created an opportunity that we didn't initially go after, but ended up being the right call.
That really resonates with us at the MassMutual Foundation, as we traditionally have given grants, but thinking about the concepts of blended finance and how we actually might be able to leverage the grant dollars that we have to unlock all the capital, beyond that that trajectory is really appealing to us and something that we'd love to learn from you how to do. So Harold, tell me about your experience with partnerships.
Absolutely, and much of that I think is the through line really for the last 40 years. And the most recent example, actually, I want to tie it back to MassMutual. And so we, back in the fall, actually had the extreme pleasure of announcing a 5-year, $25 million partnership with MassMutual. Ali and the team has been tremendous with leaning into our vision and direction for the future. And this is based on the areas of investment that I outlined a little earlier that we know are critical to certainly communities. And I always like to say, the people that Henry's investing in, we're trying to make sure that the ecosystem is there, that those entrepreneurs can get the capital that they need, or the assets are in community to be developed. But we know the opportunities and the challenges ahead requires us to think bigger, to act bolder in the ways that we not only shape technology to be in service of our future, but for us to think through new capitalization structures, new products that can meet communities where they are versus simply we have an amortized loan over 5 years and you got to fit into that, right? We know that new tools are needed to address the challenges and the opportunities really for the future. And so we've outlined this partnership over the next 5 years where we're going to be taking our an industry-based approach to first bring together different professionals and experts in the space through an innovation council that can help us think through the right pathways. The second is actually an innovation lab, making sure that we can take solutions that are subscale or solutions that are needed to actually bring them to market, to make sure that community investment is digging deeper into the needs of communities. The third, an investment fund, so that we're not just developing solutions in isolation, but we're fueling those solutions with the right capital, and partly driven by initial grant dollars that we'll use to support it, but a blended model as well that we'll look to raise. And so for us, it's taking this industry that in many ways, if you all know nonprofits and financial institutions, the grittiness, the grind of building over the years, now we have to go into the next phase of industry-based solutions where we can help organizations on the ground to leverage the tools, the capital, and ultimately the strategies that they need to dig deeper into providing supports in community.
Thank you. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of speaking on a panel about sort of the recipe for success in philanthropy, and we talked about transactional, catalytic, and transformative philanthropy, and I think the partnership that we've forged with OFN is a great example of how the MassMutual Foundation has evolved towards transformative philanthropy and thinking about not just necessarily funding a program that impacts an individual in direct relief, which is transactional and critically important, or even just thinking about our community in Springfield, Massachusetts, or a neighborhood in Boston, catalyzing folks to come together and overcoming community-wide barriers, but actually thinking about how to impact a system, the entire industry of CDFIs, and investing in the infrastructure of that system, not a program per se, not a branded flash in the pan, but something that actually will impact CDFIs across the country. And that for us is a new approach to the way that we partner. And so we're learning alongside you and appreciate the partnership so deeply and recognize the great opportunity for impact here. So I'll ask both of you as we think about transformative partnerships, how do you make sure that with your partners, they aren't just transactional, it's not just writing a check and then moving on, but that they amplify reach and effectiveness of that capital that you have?
Yeah, for us, I mean, we think about partnership in multiple dimensions. So we talked a little bit about partnering by way of aggregating capital. So that certainly is an important partnership. We're raising capital right now, both philanthropic as well as for-profit investing capital. And our alignment is really very much with folks who understand that you need to balance risk and returns when you're thinking about the impact space. And so that doesn't mean that it's concessionary capital and you're assuming that you're going to lose money. That's not it at all. It's just understanding that you are looking for the sweet spot of how to align impact with returns. And if that is not what you're after, then you're not a good investor for us. And so that's one thing to note on the partnership. The other is when we think about the actual concept development. So we have an experienced team of folks who are actual operators that deeply understand the learning space from early childhood to K-12 to post-secondary to workforce. Now, the way we think about identifying opportunities is by way of that experience in that capacity. So when we think about launching new concepts, it's not just us sitting in a lab, it's us actually engaging stakeholder networks in partnership so that we are in co-design. So we're not just picking something that seems like it's going to ultimately be a viable solution or a viable venture. We're co-developing that with folks that are key stakeholders and are ultimately the types of customers that we would actually want to work with. And it's in that sense that that level of partnership, by definition, is not transactional, because we're helping solve their problem, but we're looking for clear opportunities to solve it in ways that are scalable to other folks that look like them.
And I want to key in on this last point. So what we do is provide solutions to market failure, to be clear. And the only way that you can get to those type of solutions is actually to be in partnership. And so to think through, and I love this framework of, from transactional to transformational, because really it's us having a conversation with MassMutual to say, how do we leverage your data infrastructure? Because your business is data as an insurance company, and are there other ways to bring in other financial institutions, and for us to think differently about how we communicate about community investment and why it's important, because we all support small business, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, right? So these are the things that is important, I think, for us to begin to tee up. And if those of you that are whether you're capital allocators or you're philanthropy or you are in authority or ownership of capital, your charge, in many ways is thinking through how at an institutional level you can leverage all the levers that you have to bring forward the solutions that Henry's talking about, what I'm lifting up on behalf of our members, but making sure that it's not just transactional, because the only way we can get to the boldness of leveraging new opportunities or frankly addressing the myriad of threats that we do have, whether disaster or economic or political or policy, the only way through that is through bold partnerships. And so thinking at that level of how you can leverage all the levers that you have available to you is important.
Yeah, and I want to say from our perspective, I think this continuum of philanthropy from transactional to catalytic to transformative, each component is critically important, right? We need to meet the needs of communities and individuals and provide relief. But we can't stop there because that doesn't get to the root of the problem. And so I think what you said, Henry, is sort of understanding what kind of partnership you're looking for and what makes a good partnership is an important way to go into a conversation and understand what type of philanthropy as a corporate funder are you looking for in this instance. So I have one more question for you both. Looking ahead, what is one bold move that you believe the finance and philanthropy sectors must make in the next few years to truly meet the size of the challenges we face?
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah.
So having had the privilege of working with Bill and Melinda Gates for a number of years, I've been paying close attention to Bill's recent announcement about accelerating the closure of the foundation by saying within 20 years, they're going to spend everything down. Now, he's doing that because he's meeting the moment and he wants to accelerate change. That ultimately means they're going to have to give away $10 to $12 billion a year. Now, the open question is, while that money is moving out of the door and when it's gone, where's the next generation of great philanthropists coming from? And specifically those that actually understand this intersection between transformational grant making and impact investing, which is a really critical intersection to actually drive systemic and lasting change. And there's a ton of money that is sitting on the sidelines. There are tons of ultra high net worth individuals have teeny tiny family offices and teeny tiny foundations that are actually not deploying capital, either because they don't understand the opportunity, they don't care, or some of them are afraid in this current context to align their values with their giving and investments. So I think the bold move is for us to figure out how we collectively in this room with folks who understand multiple sources of capital and how to operate, how we come up with the next generation of intermediaries, the next generation of financial instruments that help encourage these folks to get money off the sidelines.
I don't know that I could say anything better than that. I mean, frankly, look, only thing I'll contribute to this, I often give a charge for those of you that are, funders, investors, and those sort of things, right? There's not a solution that if you are willing and truly desiring to create for what you're doing, that I can't point you either to people who are doing it or help you directly. You don't have an excuse to not be bold in this moment. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of ideas here that are transformational. Your charge, I think, is to be intentional about how you are deploying capital. I hate often the power dynamic that there is between like investments, and so often say it is a partnership because it's our charge to help capital get out into communities, and it's your charge to deploy it from your institutions, right? And so how we sit in the middle of this space, helping you through partnership is critically important, but it starts with your willingness and your boldness in thinking through how your institution is going to be the next great philanthropist, whether it's individual or philanthropy, right? But it's hard when, clarity is kindness, and fundraising is hard already, and often it's the worst dating process ever, right? Where you're in fifth and sixth date, and you're like, is there a thing here? Is there something between us? No, let's go on date number 8, right? So clarity is kindness. That's the one thing I'll leave. But be bold in this moment. We need it.
So if I could be so bold as to wrap us up with an invitation for partnership. You heard Harold talk about the partnership that MassMutual Foundation and Opportunity Finance Network recently forged. And as part of this partnership, so the 5-year, $25 million commitment that MassMutual has made to investing in the infrastructure of the CDFI industry with OFN, is that a portion of that is a fund, a pool of funds, the goal of $30 million to deploy directly to CDFIs based on what they prioritize as needed to bolster the industry. And we have carved out about $8 million of our investment for that fund. We're very proud and want to give a shout out to MasterCard for also joining us in this initiative. But we can't do this alone, and there is no pride of ownership. Our name is not on any of this. So I invite anyone out there who invests in housing, in small business, in community infrastructure, in access to capital, to come and join us in this fund to help build CDFIs all across this country, their ability to have capital access flow faster and more robustly into the communities that need it most. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.